The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Welcome back to the Nova Society, a space where dialogue deepens understanding and civic responsibility comes to life. I'm Dr. Mark Bound, joined by our regular panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon. Together, we'll unpack the stories that matter most, exploring the headlines, the history, and the big ideas shaping today's conversations. Let's dive in and hear what the panel has for us today.
We have a question today from Brian, who writes to us from Denver, Colorado. And Brian writes, "It feels like the Supreme Court may have rediscovered its backbone. This past week, the Supreme Court delivered several significant setbacks for Donald Trump's legal agenda. The court overturned his attempt to fire Fed Commissioner Lisa Cook, reaffirming the limits on the president's removal power. More consequentially, the justices upheld birthright citizenship, a principle written plainly into the 14th Amendment. But I'll admit I'm puzzled. The decision was 6-3. I'm not a lawyer, but birthright citizenship isn't exactly an interpretive puzzle. It's spelled out in the Constitution in clear, unmistakable language. So how do three members of the country's highest court read the same text and arrive at completely different conclusions? I'd really like to hear how the panel makes sense of that divide." Yes, we barely squeaked that one through. I agree with you, Brian. Mark, Scott?
I think we share your puzzlement. At least I do. The 14th Amendment is pretty clear. There's not a lot of interpretation that you need for that. They were those words are pretty solid, and are completely solid, and there's no reason to to question them. I think what Alito did was he kind of veered off of his originalism, and he started talking about what they meant to say and what they were thinking about rather than what they actually wrote, which is kind of against his whole judicial philosophy. And so I take this very seriously because according to Alito, I am not a U.S. citizen. I am not eligible to be a U.S. citizen. My mother was not a U.S. citizen until I was in first grade. So I don't understand what, I was born here. My mother is from Scotland, came here in 1954, did not become a U.S. citizen until 1969. According to Alito, I can't be a U.S. citizen, even though I was born here. Seems completely contradictory to everything I've ever learned about being a U.S. citizen.
Yeah. I mean, let's face it. Yes, the bar is very low when it comes to being a citizen of the United States. You're born here, you're born here. And I totally, Scott, you're right. The fact that Alito is usually seen as an originalist, and now because it's convenient for him, now it's what they were thinking. I'm you can't have it both ways. And he's really trying to have it both ways here. Many of his decisions say, well, wait a minute, this is what they wrote, this is what they meant. That's the way it is. It's from the Anton Scalia playbook. And Anton Scalia, God rest his soul, never veered. Never once veered. This is, but they meant this. I don't think they meant that. That, as Scott points out, that's a completely veer of ideology that Alito and Thomas has shown throughout their tenure on the court, which, please, it should come to an end. Both of them. They both should go. But anyway, when we're talking about the language, they got stuck on the words subject to the jurisdiction. And we've said this numerous times. English is not an exact language. Very low context. And they really kind of jumped on that subject to jurisdiction. So their comment is, well, wait a minute. If you're here illegally, You are not subject to the jurisdiction. Therefore, uh, this doesn't count for any of your children. But my comment to that is that, wait a minute, if you're here illegally, then your ICE agents can't arrest them because they're not subject to your jurisdiction. This also would go for if you come here and you get, let's say, a permanent residency, or you're on a green card, because the way they're interpreting it is about, your allegiances, it must be totally to the United States of America. It cannot be to the United States and somebody else. Because if it is, then your children don't qualify under this. Now, I have to admit, I love this country a lot, but my allegiance to it isn't all that great sometimes because I think we've got a stupid administration. Well, I guess my children are on their way out. And I've already called ICE, Scott. They'll be knocking on your door any minute now. You Scottish bastard, you.
I hear them coming up the driveway all the time.
They can find her out there in the middle of nowhere because she's got the Canadian thing. But I mean, so, and I've always said this: any rule made by law can be overturned because English is so damn imprecise, and we can make interpretations. But here's the thing that gets me: the Supreme Court knows, and this is where I have the hang up on it. The Supreme Court knows that if you've got something in the Constitution and you want to change it, there is a mechanism to do that. And the Supreme Court is not that mechanism. It's the legislative branch that is that mechanism. It is not the executive branch. It is the legislative branch. And the fact that the court just sort of ignored that, I mean, why didn't the court just come back and say, well, listen, yeah, it's a low bar. We agree it's a low bar, but that's what's written here. You don't like it. You've got a mechanism to change it, Congress and the states. Good luck. Go out and do it. And that's just, but they tied themselves into knots in some of these things. And then to say, well, this really all had to do with children of slaves. I mean, I get it. I truly do get it. Because let's remember, this is the 14th Amendment. This is directly after the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. Okay, I could see where you're making the connection. And there probably was a thought process in there for that connection. Probably was. But the fact is the precedent has shown throughout time, that if you're born here in the United States, regardless of the status of your parents, regardless of anything, you're a citizen. And again, it's taken the English language, and I am the first one to say it. It is a horrible language for writing the law. I mean, it truly is, because it is so imprecise. And we can look at this and we can interpret it a whole bunch of different ways. But then again, when you make the argument about the subject to the jurisdiction, okay, are you saying that illegal aliens are subject to your jurisdiction? In other words, your ICE agents are illegally arresting people they have no jurisdiction over? Are we getting into the sovereign citizen thing, or I'm a Moorish American thing? Are we getting into all of that? Is that what you guys want the can of worms you guys want to open up? And I will say this: if you ever have the opportunity, anybody out there listening, if you ever have the opportunity to go on YouTube and you need a really good laugh, there's a judge called Judge Oakley, and he deals with sovereign citizens all the time in his court, and they make these arguments about, you don't have jurisdiction. Is this a court of admiralty because your flag's got, ruffles on it and all this stuff? And it is some of the funniest stuff you'll ever hear. These people trying to tie themselves in a knot, explaining why they are not under the jurisdiction, or even better, those that say I'm a Moorish American. That's one that kind of gets me. Anyway.
Well, so I agree with you, and I do think it comes down to this term, subject to the jurisdiction. And, if anybody is here legally or otherwise, and again, my mother was here legally, she had a green card and was married to an American citizen. But the idea of not being subject to the jurisdiction, is where Alito's argument really falls
Right.
apart. Yeah, it's just, yeah, they can be arrested. Yeah, and have been, often are. It seems like over the weekend there were like 10,000 of them that got arrested. So yeah, they're subject to the jurisdiction. They can't say, you can't arrest me. I'm not even a member of your country. I'm allowed to stay here as long as I want. I mean, the contradictions are bizarre. Now, having said that, I'm not in love with the idea of birth tourism, and I don't think that our freedom should be weaponized against us, and there's something that we should do. But if you want to change the amendment, go ahead and change the amendment and go through the process that you need to do that. But that's not what they did here, and that's not what they're going to do, because we know how hard it is to change an amendment. So what they're trying to do is skirt around the amendment, and I'm afraid that, just like even a guy who only took philosophy of law and is not a lawyer understands that that's not the way to do this. So and we haven't gotten into Clarence Thomas or Neil Gorsuch, but I think Alito probably spoke most eloquently for them. Whatever Justice Kavanaugh was thinking about, I don't understand that. He disagreed with the court's ruling, but he is blocking their executive order under the 14th Amendment. Try to figure out what that guy is up about. I don't know if it was Hansi Hank or Squee who was the one who talked him into that interpretation of the law. But but the idea of coming up with a law, and I think Trump has proposed that pregnant women are no longer allowed to fly into the United States, which is a little
or
extreme.
they should be sterilized. Women should be sterilized.
Oh yeah,
I heard that.
I didn't hear that.
Oh yeah, there's somebody in Congress, some Republican said, "Oh, women should be sterilized, foreign women." Yeah, notice how nobody wants to sterilize the men.
Well,
it's all about the women.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, ugh. Please.
And you know what, Scott, you're right. Sometimes we get our freedoms and our rights used against us. Prime example, this past weekend in Washington, D.C., the neo-Nazis, in mass walking through Washington, D.C., and everybody saying, well, hey, you know what? It's freedom of speech. They terrorized, a city.
That picture of the young black woman sitting there. The young woman
in the subway. Absolutely.
Oh, my Lord.
I mean, seriously. And I'll tell you something. I give her all the credit in the world. She sat there. There's some courage right there with masked neo-Nazis basically walking around. And, somebody say, oh, they're really not neo-Nazis. You know what? Call it what it is. Yes, they are.
As far as the other part of this is concerned, yeah, I mean, I got I think I do have an issue with their finding on the FTC. And kicking Rebecca Slaughter out of the FTC simply because she's a Democrat. And Trump hired her knowing that she was a Democrat. She was confirmed by the Senate knowing that she was a Democrat. They needed to have a Democrat on the FTC. And she has done nothing to harm the presidency at all. There was certainly no cause for her to be dismissed by Trump. It's just that he wanted to put somebody who was more compliant onto the FTC than he felt that she is. So I don't really understand. And John Roberts wrote their opinion on this, and what he said was, the president must have the assistance of officers he can trust. It's up to the Senate to decide whether to confirm them with whom the president would prefer to work. Neither Congress nor the courts may saddle him with those with whom he cannot work. And they didn't. All they did was confirm his choice. Subordinates who exercise the president's power are subject to removal by him, and then and only then can they remain accountable to the president and the president to the people. Okay, so this is the thrust of unitary executive theory, but here the idea is that he made a choice. Biden reappointed her. She was, by all accounts, doing a good job. Nobody had a problem with her. She wasn't abusing the office in any way. And there was really no reason to remove her, the idea that John Roberts has is kind of counterintuitive, maybe is the right word, to what the United States is all about. Um, we have, maybe I'll take this from the viewpoint of a communication professor. Groupthink is not a good thing, and this president has been group thinking. And when you surround yourself by nobody who will offer you another opinion, or whether they're not willing to stand up for their opinion by resigning or something like that, or protesting in some way, then the groupthink forms bad decisions. And we've seen this before, right? We saw it with the invasion of Iraq, for example. It was a perfect example of groupthink, where all the presidents, men and women at that time, got together and agreed that we must go do this. And they made up stories about Iraq having weapons of mass destruction, and they sold it to the people, although most of us were pretty dubious about it because they didn't offer any proof. The New York Times, remember, published a op-ed from a guy who was actually sent by the administration to go check out whether Niger had sold Iraq yellow cake. It turned out that they didn't, and they lied and said that he did. So they completely corrupted his findings. They sent, I believe it was 33 Iraqis with ties to people who were in Iraq, who were part of the weapons of mass destruction program there. And 31 of those 33 came back and said there's no program anymore, according to their relatives who were working in that program. And they suppressed that information. So, we're going to talk at some point on our podcast about the cause of the war of Iran with Iran. And I think we need to understand that having the assistance of officers that you can trust is important, but they can't be rubber stamps. They have to be able to say, oh, legally this is such and such, and oh, that would be a really bad idea because they can always close the Strait of Hormuz and create chaos. Like, they've got to be taken seriously. Their advice is important to the decision-making process. And when you have one guy who does things by whim and not with like calculations and not by understanding the situation, then you don't have a president anymore. In my opinion, you have a king, and we don't really want to have any kind of kings, because kings end up with their heads cut off, and it's a bad scene.
So there is an upside.
Yeah, that's very, 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 well, I guess it depends on which side you're on. If you're a monarchist, it might not be so great. I was thinking about Vietnam, which is the one I've studied, and Irving Janis, the psychologist who wrote the text on groupthink, and he pointed out that the more the group comes together and the more the group agrees with one another, the more they congratulate one another on how brilliant they are, and the more they like one another because they all agree, and the more insular their decision-making becomes, and the further from reality as it is on the ground they travel in their mental, in their thinking, because they're not there looking at the situation. So it's like it's a part of magical thinking, because they're in their own little world over here, the groupthink world, and reality is over there somewhere. And of course, we've seen that time and time again with Trump. He's created his own reality, that it's a magical thinking reality. All he has to do is say it, and it's true. And he will refuse to believe in objective reality, and he expects his followers to do the same, and in many cases they will agree with him and refuse to believe what is genuinely happening, including when they're shown what is genuinely happening. In what is Nyhan and Reifler's what's called the backfire effect. The more information the person is actually shown, the less they believe, rather than the reverse. They continue to drift more and more and more into what is occult or magical thinking, as we've seen time and time again.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is why
Yeah, I mean,
a good leader will have people who will deliberately disagree and bring in alternative perspectives that are viable and real and grounded in reality, rather than all this ridiculousness. And going back to the point you were making about the birthright citizenship, didn't Vance, like, heard part of his 4th of July speech, and I just couldn't listen to the rest of it. Didn't he say that unless your grandparents were here before the Civil War, you're not an American citizen? And I thought, well, how stupid is that? Because many people's grandparents, including mine, or at least a couple of mine, were not born before the Civil War. So of course they weren't here before the Civil War. And the only grandparent the one grandparent I have who did immigrate, was not alive before the Civil War either. My other grandparents, as far as 2 of them, I know at least, were born here. So does that, it's like with the Nazis, if you had one Jewish grandparent, you weren't German or Aryan, which didn't exist. That was made up by the Aryans were created by a Russian woman named Madame Blavatsky. So is this like what the Nazis did? If you have one immigrant grandparent, you're not American now?
right. It's like Nuremberg rules or something. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, what Vance said didn't even make any sense. Many people's grandparents were not here before the Civil War because they weren't born yet. Yeah, I don't even know what the man is talking about.
So what if your grandparents were alive and they fought for the Confederacy? Does that now, eliminate you from being a citizen? There's another question. Yeah, it really isn't a complex issue. I mean, we have said this time and time again. Yes, it's a low bar. Absolutely. We are probably one of the very few, if any other country, that actually allows such a thing, such as birthright citizenship. I understand what the court is saying as to why which surprised me, the originalists are talking about what they were thinking. I understand what they're saying, and okay, fine. But they also know that there is a mechanism to make the change. It's hard. And the mechanism is not executive order. That is not the mechanism. And I did not hear one single thing from the dissent that acknowledged the understanding that executive order is the problem. You can't do this by executive order. Nor can you do this by court order. You cannot do it either. Those are 2 ways that just don't work on this. This is the purview of the legislative, and you've got to legislate it in. And yes, it's hard. Yes, it's a lot of work. But hey, if you think it's worth doing, then get your ass out there and do the work to make it happen.
Did you hear what Stephen Miller was yelling about it?
No, I never listened to Stephen Miller.
We're Vance.
That Stephen Miller was shouting that, I don't know why he has to scream. He reminds me of Goebbels, Joseph Goebbels. He was yelling that people from other countries who were not real Americans or something, their children would one day be able to sit in judgment on courts, on you and me and this and that. And he was very angry. The idea that people from other countries, and then by that, of course, he would mean African countries and places, not proper Western Europe and Eastern Europe, and places that are, quote, good, unquote, would be able to sit in judgment on a court and judge him. And I thought, my God, man, I mean, there is something seriously wrong with him. And he was quite impassioned about it. I mean, I expect him to have an aneurysm or something.
We can only hope.
So can we get back to the court, though? Because we could talk about how crazy the people around Trump are until the day is long. But the question that we're answering is about the Supreme Court decisions, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And and I want to try to streamline our conversation to that as much as we can. And here's one of the aspects I was wondering what you guys think about this, is that this is a door that swings both ways. Like one of the things that Gorsuch talked about in his in his decision, I guess, on, I forget whether it was Cook or Slaughter, was that these agencies. Okay, let me see if I can finesse this, because I think that's what he did. Agencies will retain their legislative and adjudicative powers, but at the same time become more directly controlled by the president, concentrating greater regulatory power in the president. So if Trump or some future president who may not be a Republican and may not be Gorsuch's favorite person in the world decides that this is the way it's going to be, and we're going to enforce these regulations instead of other ones that this administration has ignored, then that's going to be okay, according to Gorsuch. As I've mentioned before on this podcast, my older brother is a white collar crime attorney with a big firm in New York City, and he was telling me a while back that a lot of the cases that he's been working on for years have been abruptly dismissed by the DOJ, by Trump's DOJ, because there seems to be a belief in this administration that fraud is a good thing, and that people who get defrauded have no remedy for it, and that they got what they deserved, and that people who commit fraud are the heroes of this administration, and that there's no reason why the DOJ should be prosecuting them simply because they took advantage of the law or took advantage of other people. All of this seems very familiar when you think about Trump and his career. And it really does seem like the DOJ, at least, probably the FTC as well, and the SEC, I'm guessing, follow in his shadow and follow his lead in thinking, that fraud is good. And people deserve to be ripped off if you can rip them off. There's a sucker born every minute. Go get them. That really does seem to be, to me, the way I'm interpreting what Gorsuch is saying in his concurrence with Slaughter, that's the way that it should be. Now, the court did not allow Trump to remove Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. And, he clearly weaponized the DOJ or whatever. What was Bill Pulte in charge of? Some kind of housing thing where they were looking into people's mortgage applications. Yeah.
Yes.
And that's what they got Lisa Cook on. It was like some kind of like, was her house going to be the full-time house or a second house or whatever it was?
Yes. Yep.
And her mortgage application.
With the New York Attorney General.
Right.
Letitia James.
Yeah. And so they said, the Supreme Court had, this is a 5-4 ruling, where they said, well, they're not deciding whether Cook could be removed, but we are saying that the federal government should not be subject to political interference, and they declined to allow Trump to strike down the Federal Reserve's acts for, that say that you have to be removed for cause, and that this was not for cause. So, I think we're entering a different time for the United States of America, where all these agencies, the SEC and the Consumer Finance Board, or whatever it is, the FCC, right, which has gone after broadcasters and broadcasting companies, are all subject to the whims of the President of the United States and whatever his or her someday desires are. But because the Federal Reserve goes back to the first and second banks of the United States, it is not subject to the same rules. It seems fairly incoherent to me, but I guess I'll take the victory that at least Trump is going to face a hard situation, because the Federal Reserve is going to have to raise interest rates, and he wants them to drop interest rates. And he managed to get his guy, Kevin Walsh, in there as the chair, but they're gonna come to odds, because the Federal Reserve is going to have to raise interest rates, and that's not the exact opposite of what he wants them to do. So stay tuned, folks. We'll see later on in this year what happens with that. I think they meet again in September or maybe early October. I forget exactly.
Yeah, and the thing to remember here for all the Republicans who are jumping up and down saying, "Boy, this is terrible." When Trump loses one of these battles, or when he wins one of those battles, remember, now a precedent has been set, and if you don't get your guy in, it will be used against you. And no whining, no whining. Don't think short term. Remember the long-term impact of these decisions coming out of the Supreme Court. Just keep those things in mind, because they usually have a tendency to come back and bite you on the ass. And we'll see how it all plays out. Okay.
So, well, the reason I brought up Miller is it's the more control of the population, and if they were going to get rid of birthright citizenship by avoiding creating a new amendment, it's it's just more controlling the population and denying visas and refusing immigrants and arresting people and ejecting people from the country. It's part of the same structural strategy. And from what I have read, Miller is the one who is the architect of this, and he seems quite rabid about it. And this is greatly unfortunate for us, the public. Very damaging.
It's definitely bigly.
Yeah, in a very negative way.
Okay.
Stephen Miller's a big asshole, no doubt about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of Nova Society Media, a division of the Phoenix Research Institute. We want to thank our production partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing team, Apple Podcasts, the largest source of podcast and music online, Spotify, the most popular platform for the Nova Society, and iHeartRadio, your destination for all things music and podcasting. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms listed in our description. And most importantly, we want to thank you, our listeners. Without your support, the Nova Society could not be possible. If If you haven't already, please consider subscribing on the platform of your choice. It's easy, it's free, and helps our channel grow. For questions or comments, you can reach us at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. So on behalf of Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Scott Gershworth, and all of our production partners here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Remember, the true power of society is knowledge. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next time.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening!